this pedestal for the flowers at church, I wanted to make a box that would fit on top of a small table that already exists. And so I made the length of this 15 inches and the height 6 inches, and the depth will be 9 inches. And I wanted to have a pattern on there, carved in there, of religious significance, and I was going to use wording on the front that said, "I am the vine, you are the branches." And so I thought, hey, let's use some grapes, a grapevine. And so I went ahead and imported a grape model, and then I rotated the grape model, and then I looked at it and said, this is a little odd because the grapes now are horizontal, and that's not really the way grapes would grow. I thought I could probably get away with this top grape leaving it horizontal, but this bottom one I really needed to rotate it. So I used a function in Aspire that allows you to split out part of a model and make it a separate model in the file. All you got to do is draw a boundary around the part you want to split out, and then use this function up here. It looks like a pair of scissors. Says split the selected component using a vector. So I carefully drew a vector around this set of grapes, split it out, and then I could independently rotate it, manipulate it any way I want. It really was a separate model. I could do anything I want. And so with that in mind, let's go over to the back of the pedestal model. You can see here what I did. I actually rotated that set of grapes a little bit, and then I had to do some modeling. But that's what I ended up with. And so this is the basic model that I'm using for all four sides of the pedestal. On the back, it's pretty much full size. On the sides, I've scrunched it down some, and then on the front I'll show you what I did there in just a moment. Before I move off the back, this is cut in relief. In other words, the background is cut away and the model stands proud. And so I actually cut down an entire ½ inch into the work, but I also wanted to have a little, kind of a pedestal look. So I made a little round over on the bottom. The front, also cut in relief, says, "I am the vine, you are the branches," which is a biblical verse. And I used that same feature, that same tool from Aspire, where you could split out part of the model and make it a separate model, to cut out just some vine with leaves sections. And I simply mirrored that section across the work. So I only had to go through that splitting and, smoothing and adding and doing a little sculpting. I only had to do that one time, and then I could mirror that. And then I could also make the letters. Now this lettering is also cut in relief. In other words, the letters are proud of the final surface. The way I did that was to make the vectors of the letters using this Old English script, and then create shape to make letters with a slightly angled side and a nice rounded upper edge. And so each of these is in fact a little three-dimensional model. To do the rails, I've drawn a top and a bottom guideline, and then I drew the shape that I want the rail to be in, and then I used the two-rail sweep function to extrude that shape along the material, and that's what forms the actual rail. And when you're all done, you end up with that extruded shape, as you can see right here, all the way down the length. Before I start actually cutting the material for the pedestal, I want to have a nice fence on which to align the material, because it's important that the cuts are nice and square so that each end has the same dimensions, and when I miter them together, everything will mate up. So I've attached a piece of scrap wood here, and I'm going to cut a fluting path with a 1/4 inch bit So if I run that across, that ought to cut this edge here to be perfectly on the y equals 0, and then I can align the wood to that. Yesterday when I cut the front, it did a nice job with the lettering and the vines, but it really took a long time. It took most of the day to do this cut. There was about an hour in the rough cut and about 5 hours in the finished cut with the 16th inch ball nose, tapered ball nose bit. So there's got to be a better way to do this, and let's try to find out. I'm going to show you how the bit actually cuts. I've animated this. I'm going to use the finishing cut and preview it with an animated bit. So you can see the bit going back and forth. And it starts the cut on the very surface of the rail and then slowly gets deeper and deeper as the cut progresses up through the piece. Well, the advantage of that is the tapered ball nose bit has a flute that goes way up the side of the bit. And so that flute can be cutting the entire time if you let it. Instead of just using the very tip of the ball nose, I'm going to actually use part of the side of the flute and taking very light passes, 10% or so of the bit's diameter. That is of the 16th inch bit's diameter, so these are very tiny passes. I'm not putting undue strain on the bit, and yet I'm making the same cut, and I can completely eliminate using a rough cutting bit on this piece. So now we'll cut the back using this technique we just talked about. The work with the ShopBot is complete. It did a nice job. There was a lot of fuzzies that I had to use a wire brush, a brass wire brush, and some carving gouges to remove. So I'm ready to go ahead and put miters on these pieces to put it together. Now I'm using my compound sliding miter saw, and before I do that I made a few adjustments. First I took some scrap pieces and cut some 45s on there, and then used a square to make some slight adjustments to get that just as perfect as I could. So that's a good starting point for getting those miters on there. I've made marks here, and I'm going to go ahead and use a backing board to prevent some blowout, and we'll go ahead and cut the miters. I'm going to use these small 5 by 30 millimeter dominoes to hold the piece together, and I'll put 3 of these dominoes in each corner. And the trick is to get the lines for lining up the machine the same on both mating pieces. So what I decided to do was to just set these pieces together as closely as I could to the way they should be, and then use a ruler straight across the top and just scribe my lines. Well, here's the completed pedestal. The lettering on the front, grapes and vines on the sides and back. I took a piece of plywood and rabbited it into the box. I didn't film that. You can actually see that process in the video making a fishing tackle box, but it's just a simple rabbit with an inset glued in. I also found that the overhanging edge here, the lip that I had, really wasn't working for me, so I cut that back to make it much less pronounced, and I think that's just going to work better with the flowers on top. So I appreciate you watching this video, and thank you very much.